Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I am going to be discussing all of the books that I read in April. So overall, I would say that April was a decent reading month, which was fortunate because April is also the month of my birthday. In lieu of my birthday, I did a little bit of bookstore hopping. I went to a few different bookstores in my city, and so I of course have a pretty good haul of birthday books, which I'm planning on making a video of birthday haul that I will be posting next week, so look forward to that. For the month of April, I started a grand total of 8 books. 6 of those I completed. One of those I'm still in the middle of, and the last book was a DNF for me. As far as everything I did complete, I read a grand total of 2,413 pages. And then for ratings, I gave 1 3-star, 2 3.5 stars, 2 4 stars, 1 5-star, and a DNF. As usual, I think I will discuss these books from the one I like the least all the way up to the one I like the most. Well, technically I'm going to start with the book that I DNF'd and then work my way up to the book I like the most. That way that we can end on a high note. So let's talk about the books. All right, so the book that I DNF'd this month, unfortunately, was Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. This book follows a character named Breck, who is a former soldier, and she at one point was part of this really powerful empire and was in kind of a hive mind in this empire, and there was some sort of act of treachery that happened that pulled her away from this. The synopsis is actually pretty vague, but overall it's kind of, you get the sense that this is kind of like a revenge quest type of story. This book won a Hugo and Nebula Award, which is saying a lot. That means a lot in the world of sci-fi. As far as the writing goes, I absolutely agree that it is fantastically written. This book does something very unusual, something I have never seen in any other book, nothing I've ever read in any other book, and that is that the characters, regardless of their sex, are all referred to with female pronouns. I thought it was incredibly cool. I really enjoyed that about the story. However, the reason that I ended up putting this book down is because this is one of those kinds of stories where you get dropped into the middle of the story and things are just sort of happening and things are not well explained. I honestly do not have a problem with that, but I feel like when books do that, it does require a certain amount of energy and focus to to really immerse yourself into that kind of world well enough that you can follow along and get invested. And I just haven't had that kind of energy and focus to put into a story like that. That being said, I feel like though I DNF this book, for me, this is a soft DNF. I just couldn't get invested in the story, no matter how hard I tried. But I feel like that won't always be true. I feel like I will be able to come back to this book in the future and get into it when I just kind of have the mental space to do that. So for now, this book was a DNF for me. All right, next we have The Passengers by John Marrs. This is also a sci-fi novel, and it is set in a future where self-driving cars have become kind of the norm. I think it's like 7 or 8 people who are in these self-driving cars, and they get, someone takes control of the cars and is basically threatening to kill them off one by one, and this whole thing is being broadcast across the world. This was a very quick read, very fast-paced, really high intensity type of story. And I think for me, this book was okay. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was pretty middle of the road for me. There are 2 reasons that I didn't love this book. The first one being that I feel like though I love the TV show, I am getting a little burnt out on books and stories that have that sort of Black Mirror kind of thing going on. Technology has gone awry or whatever. I'm just kind of over it. Also, this book has a kind of a romantic subplot whipped into it. I really don't like books that are really high intensity and everyone is sort of freaking out and this horrible thing is happening, but they are like being romantic with each other. But I think that this book has mass appeal. Like I said, it is very fast-paced, a lot of like high action. You get really pulled into this book easily. The story, it's easy to follow along, easy to get invested. So I think for most people, you'd probably, if you haven't read this book and you like kind of, you know, techno thriller type stories, you would probably really enjoy this book. So that is definitely the type of person I would recommend this to. So yeah, 3 stars for The Passengers. All right, next up the list, we have The Promised Neverland by Kayu Shirai. This is a manga. This is the first manga that I have ever read, and it is the story of a group of children who live in an orphanage. Then they seem to have this happy, comfortable life. They are taken care of by a woman they all call Mom, and they are just a bunch of happy children in this orphanage. But one day, a couple of the older children, they witness something that makes them realize that their situation is not as it seems, and in fact is a pretty dark situation that they're in. I'm just gonna leave it at that. This was actually recommended to me by my friend Elsa at the French Book Dreamer. She had offered to make manga suggestions, and I took her up on it and told her the types of books that I like to read. I like sci-fi, I like urban fantasy, I like horror, I like kind of weird, dark stories, whatever. And I think she did a great job recommending this book to me. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, which may not sound like the highest rating, but this is the first in I think it's a pretty long series actually. It's gonna take a while for me to get really invested into the characters and into the story, which is fine, but I liked it enough that I think I will definitely continue on with the series. It was a fun thing to read. I read this right after I sat down Ancillary Justice. Ancillary Justice nearly threw me into a reading slump, and I just needed something to kind of keep me from feeling that, and that's what this book did for me. Like I read it over the course of 2 days, and it was a great palette cleanser. Yeah, I really like this book, and I feel like for someone who has not read manga before, this was like a really good one to start with. It was an enjoyable read for me. So yeah, 3.5 stars for The Promised Neverland. Next up, we have Finder by Suzanne Palmer. This is a sci-fi novel. It is kind of a space opera. It is about a character he's pretty much a hired thief, and he is sent on this mission to steal back a ship that was stolen by sort of like a crime lord. And so he heads out to the far reaches of space to this colony where this ship is supposed to be located. He's able to find the ship and this man out in this colony, but unfortunately a sort of civil war breaks out as he gets there. I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's actually, there's a lot more to it. This is a pretty complex story. A lot happens in this book for the length of it. This book, I enjoyed it pretty well. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. This is the first in a series, and though I liked this well enough, I doubt I will continue with it. I think this book tried to do a little bit too much for the length of it. I think that this story could have been broken into 2. And I don't know why it wasn't, considering that it is in fact a series. There was no reason for the author to cram it all into one book. I don't know, it was interesting. I liked the concept, and I liked sort of the feel of the book. It was just a little exhausting for me to read. I think it was just what it boiled down to, was just my own personal preference for a space opera to be a little bit more contained. So take that with a grain of salt, if you will. But for me, this was a 3.5 star. The next book up the list is The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. This is a sci-fi novel, and it is about a woman who is a caver, and she takes this job that is supposedly pays very, very well, and she's going to go down into this cave on another planet. Come to find out, there is a whole lot more to this situation than this woman realizes, and it very quickly becomes an extremely dangerous situation. The synopsis says quite a bit more, but I feel like the best way to experience this book is to go into it not knowing too much. I really, really liked this actually. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This is pretty much, whenever I read the book The Cavern, this was what I was hoping that book would be. This was an incredibly atmospheric book, and very, very suspenseful. I very quickly got hooked on this story. I don't think that this is for everyone. In fact, after reading this book, I looked up reviews of it, and it seems like a very black or white sentiment people have about this. Either they love it or they hate it and think it's super boring. For me, it really works. It's a very psychologically complex book. I mean, this woman is down in this cave and she's in the pitch black, and you are really in her head for a lot of it. So you experience a lot of very kind of disturbing, creepy things that are happening. So if that sort of psychological type of story is something that you generally like, I would absolutely recommend this. It just really worked for me. If you pick it up, I hope it works for you too. So 4 stars for me for The Luminous Dead. All right, next up we have Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the second in a series, or in a trilogy actually. It's called the Founders Trilogy. The first book was Foundry Side, which was one of my favorite books that I read last year. These books are set in a world where magic is kind of almost like industrialized. How it is used specifically is to basically enchant objects to think that they are something that they are not. So enchanting wood to make it believe that it is like stone, so it is stronger than stone, or enchanting carriage wheels to believe that they are continually rolling downhill so they don't need a horse to pull them or whatever. In the story, it follows a young woman named Sanchia, she's also a hired thief type of character. And in the first book, she is hired to steal this object that winds up being a very powerful object. It's a very cat and mouse story. It definitely made me really interested to pick up the second book, so I was really excited to pick this one on my last TBR. I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars, which isn't as high as what I gave Foundry Side. Foundry Side I gave 4.5 stars, which for Foundry Side, though I loved Foundry Side, I docked a 0.5 point on it then because it was pretty info dumpy. Fortunately for Shorefall, it was not info dumpy, not at all really. It absolutely thrust you back into the world without a whole lot of explanation, which I actually ended up sort of missing. I had a hard time. It had been a while since I had read Foundry Side, so whenever I opened this up, my memory was not great about what the specifics of what had happened in the previous book. So I wish this had kind of touched on that a little bit more, but nonetheless, it was a very enjoyable story to read. The reason I didn't give it 4.5 or 5 stars is because it sort of went in an unexpected direction. It was just as well written as the first book, but just not as interesting as the first book. That doesn't mean it wasn't interesting. It was still very interesting, and I really, really liked it. Obviously, it's nearly at the very top of my list for April, but it just wasn't really what I was expecting. Nonetheless, it is absolutely worthwhile. I really like this series a lot. So 4 stars for Shorefall. All right, the final book that I completed this month, and the book that I enjoyed the most of all the books I completed this month, was The Handmaid's Tale graphic novel, which was adapted and illustrated by Renee Nault. The original book, The Handmaid's Tale, is written by Margaret Atwood. This is a book that I actually ended up buying on my birthday as sort of a treat to myself. I do own it, but I am too lazy to go downstairs and get it right now. But since it is a book that I bought myself for my birthday, I will have it in my hand in my video next week whenever I talk about all the books that I bought, my birthday haul basically. It's no secret, if you've watched my videos for a while, you know that I love The Handmaid's Tale. I think it's a fascinating story. So whenever I saw this graphic novel at the bookstore, I had to get it. It was a little bit expensive, but it is a very, very nice book. The illustrations are gorgeous, and it just, the interpretation, the adaptation of it is fantastic. I ended up giving it 5 stars. If you've ever been interested in The Handmaid's Tale but worrying that the original novel might be a little bit too dry, it can be a little dense for some people, I think. I feel like this is the perfect option for you to experience this story in an easier to read, easier to follow along sort of way, and the illustrations just really bring it to life. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Like I said, 5 stars for me, and if you have any interest in this whatsoever, I absolutely recommend that you pick it up. The final book that I wanted to mention is the book that I am currently in the middle of, and that is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, and I am on, let's see here, I'm on page 170 out of like 1,000 and some odd pages. If you're watching my videos, you've probably heard of the Stormlight Archive. I've been participating in a year-long read-along of the Stormlight Archive. I read the first book, The Way of Kings, over the course of January, February, and March, and I am reading Words of Radiance for April, May, and June. The read-along is hosted by my friend Yolene at Yolene Reads, and there's quite a few other booktubers who are reading along as well. I was supposed to be part of the discussion of Way of Kings, but ended up just getting too busy, too overwhelmed, and I was unable to participate in that. But you will absolutely see me participating in the live discussion for Words of Radiance at the end of June. But so far I am really enjoying this, and it did take a little while to hook me. I would say it probably took about 75 to 100 pages to really hook me, but now I am into this, and I honestly can't stop thinking about it. Over the next couple months, I will give periodic updates about my experience reading Words of Radiance. So I think that is going to be it for me today. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. I would be very curious to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. So I hope that you will talk to me about it in the comments down below. Also, if you read anything in April that you really liked, please share that down below, as I am always looking for my next great book recommendation. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.